For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice.
Because no lie can live forever.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Because you shall reap what you sow.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
True forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne.
Yes,
Yet that scaffold sways the future.
The Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights are the principles in which we believe, and that these documents, if put into practice, represent the essence of mankind's hopes and good intentions to reinforce the common bond of purpose between our people by submerging all of our differences and establishing non-sectarian constructive programs for human rights.
No martyr's cause has ever been stilled by an assassin's bullet. No wrongs have ever been righted by riots and civil disorders. And an uncontrolled or uncontrollable mob is only the voice of madness, not the voice of the people.
To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil. We have it within our power to begin the world over again. We can do it, doing together what no one could do by itself.
When these agencies get corrupted at the top, and they create a culture of corruption. And we saw that with the FBI. We saw that in the CIA. And so when the leadership is rotten, it spreads down.
The FBI is complicit on so many levels. Their far-reaching tentacles have rooted so deeply throughout our societies that I cannot even imagine how that could possibly be cleaned up.
I know that just as 90% of the police are good people trapped in a bad system, 90% of the intelligence community are good people trapped in a bad system. I think CIA, the FBI, and elements of the NSA are out of control.
If we do it right, and if the reform is done right of the intelligence agencies, I can see the UK, I can see, Australia, I can see all the other countries, Germany, you name it, following suit.
This is the time that you need to step forward and say what's been going on, to speak out against it, to make it clear, to make it known. These agencies are facing a time of reckoning.
Since the beginning, spying and intelligence gathering have been used by religious, military, and political leaders, as well as wealthy bankers and financiers. Their tactics, often duplicitous, rely on psychological and covert warfare. They have waged coups, arranged political assassinations, trained and armed insurgents and death squads, crashed economies, and in the process, they have taken countless innocent lives. The most famous modern intelligence agencies have worked for generations with very little public transparency. They are the shadowy hands of some of the most powerful nations on the planet. Many whistleblowers and insiders have come forward with claims of ulterior motives, infiltration, and systemic corruption, all the way to the very top of these agencies. These intrepid souls have often been silenced, harassed, and intimidated for shining light on the inherent murkiness of this system. By 1963, the post-war baby boomers were reaching maturity, and America was on the cusp of a psycho-spiritual and cultural revolution. This was the generation that would soon give rise to widespread support for the civil rights movement, the birth of the New Left, the anti-war movement, and the demand for direct action with respect to women's rights and equal rights. In John F. Kennedy, the youngest man to serve as president, second only to Teddy Roosevelt, the youth wave of the 60s found its King Arthur. His youth helped him relate to a world striving for a new way, while his experience as a veteran of World War II helped him appreciate war's danger. He thus embodied the spirit of Camelot as a philosopher king, desiring that equality and the pursuit of happiness be available to all under the U.S. Constitution. Kennedy spoke openly about infiltration instead of invasion by a shadowy and monolithic conspiracy. Many thought he was referring to communism, but the international communist conspiracy itself was manipulated by deeper, more insidious layers of power, as acknowledged by Professor Carroll Quigley in his historical tome, Tragedy and Hope. Quigley would write in the years after Kennedy's death, "There does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so." Quigley was no loony conspiracy theorist. He was professor of history at the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University, where he mentored many political elites, most notably Bill Clinton. So in 1961, was Kennedy's concern over a monolithic conspiracy at the heart of establishing the Defense Intelligence Agency under the purview and oversight of his office? And did that conspiracy reach its full effect on November 22nd, 1963, as the world watched one of their most promising leaders executed right before their eyes? What followed was a domino effect of chaos that would accompany some of the most transformational decades of American history. A generation watched as one by one, some of the most influential leaders of free thought, free expression, and human rights were murdered, causing a cascading effect of trauma for decades to come. These shocks, broadcast continuously, and in some cases, in real time, to millions of people instantly on television. This showed the immense power of persuasion that mainstream media has over the public consciousness as a propaganda machine. Was the Kennedy assassination the start of a long-form coup against the Constitution of the United States by a network of criminal syndicates? Is that coup still trying to play itself out today? Has the mainstream media been complicit in covering up and protecting the groups behind this conspiracy? Are we witnessing a silent war between white hats and black hats being waged by the intelligence agencies? Was the assassination of JFK one of the greatest true conspiracies of all time?
I used to not be, prone to conspiracies. But I got to tell you, as I've gotten older, and certainly now through the personal experience that the family has been through, I have a harder time believing anything that I hear, particularly from mainstream sources. There's a lot of evidence, in my opinion, that elements within the U.S. government were behind the assassination of John Kennedy.
Lyndon Baines Johnson led it. Allen Dulles provided the firepower, including Harvey bringing in Corsican hitmen from Italy. You had Texas oil, you had New York money. The truth about the JFK assassination is known. He was assassinated, as was Martin Luther King, as was Robert F. Kennedy, by the U.S. government.
A big joke was when you couldn't reach someone over at the CIA, oh, they're probably just overthrowing a small government, it's okay. That was a joke, we used to have. But if you look back when, JFK was president and they were going to start things here in the United States that would look poorly on Cuba.
By 1963, even the man who formed the CIA, President Truman, was saying it had gone beyond its original mandate. I would like to see the CIA restored to its original assignment as the intelligence arm of the president, and that its operational duties be terminated or properly used elsewhere. By this time, its operational duties included dirty tricks, false flag operations, a term dating back to the era of pirates, when a navy flew its country's banner, and sometimes false flags belonging to another country in order to frame that country as the perpetrator in an attack. This type of deception to create conflict has been used throughout history. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff recommended a false flag called Operation Northwoods. Northwoods called for the CIA to commit violent acts of terrorism on American military targets and innocent civilians. These horrific acts would then be blamed on Cuba to justify a U.S. invasion. Kennedy had already rubber-stamped a CIA-led invasion of Cuba the year before, which ended in disaster at the Bay of Pigs when Kennedy refused to send U.S. air support to escalate the conflict. Kennedy took responsibility for the quietly fired CIA director, Allen Dulles, and reportedly said he wanted to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces. Kennedy vetoed Operation Northwoods, but after his death, a similar false flag was used to justify a war in Vietnam. At the Gulf of Tonkin, when the USS Maddox was reported to have come under attack twice by North Vietnamese boats. In fact, not only had the Maddox initiated the conflict in the first encounter, the second alleged attack had never happened. Congress was fooled into granting President Johnson powers to escalate to full-scale war in Vietnam, not unlike what would happen in 2003, when false allegations of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons program would lead to the second war with Iraq. One might wonder why it takes years for the general public to learn the truth about things like the Gulf of Tonkin incident and other government conspiracies. Perhaps because the CIA has had assets in the mainstream news since the end of World War II. Carl Bernstein, famed for his journalism on the Watergate scandal, later uncovered Operation Mockingbird, a CIA program spanning more than 20 years, influencing over 400 journalists in more than 25 major newspapers and wire agencies. Imagine how many millions of minds were influenced by CIA-approved propaganda.
JFK said, I'm going to take the CIA and break them into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the winds. These agencies have only gotten worse and worse. There's been no accountability. These operations that they have run against the American people are completely public. The stuff is in the public domain. It's known. Operation Northwoods, that the CIA did against the American people. Operation Mockingbird, to use elements in the mainstream media. MK Ultra.
The Kennedy assassination was when so much of MK Ultra was put into society because the trauma was used on people. Whenever trauma occurs, people become easily led, highly suggestible. So whenever we're having trauma in our society, people need to safeguard their minds. They need to double check. They need to research. They need to think things through very, very carefully. Because the New World Order gained a whole lot of their control when the Kennedy assassination occurred.
More disturbing than CIA propaganda against the American public are the programs the CIA and other government agencies have deployed against the American people. These operations were illegal and sometimes fatal. The MKUltra projects were a collection of CIA-developed mind control programs and experiments, some of which evolved from Nazi research in concentration camps during the Holocaust. The programs tested variable methods of manipulating subjects' mental states and brain functions in order to map the brain and better understand how the human mind works. The size and scope of MKUltra is staggering, with research undertaken at over 80 colleges, hospitals, and prisons all across the United States, often on unwitting subjects. The programs included the use of psychoactive drugs, electroshock treatment, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, physical and sexual abuse, and that is from what is known. Most MKUltra documents were intentionally destroyed by CIA Director Richard Helms, thus leaving much to the realm of lore and oral history. But from what we have learned from new revelations of MKUltra documents from the Black Vault, brain implants were used on animals that could effectively remote control them, like biological drones. As MKUltra scientist Jose Delgado framed it, we must electronically control the brain. Someday armies and generals will be controlled by electric stimulation of the brain. And the need for the intelligence agencies to control the American public goes much deeper than mind control. COINTELPRO was, like MKUltra, an illegal and secret project conducted by the FBI, which focused on spying upon, infiltrating, discrediting, and destroying grassroots political organizations and their leaders. This included, but was not limited to, the Black Panthers, the Society for Individual Rights, the American Indian Movement, the Women's Rights Movement, and even Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. To the present day, the FBI continues to infiltrate domestic political groups and crack down on movements like Occupy Wall Street. But most strikingly, the FBI has been found to have hatched and financed many of the domestic terror plots of the post-9/11 era, which begs the question, if the 9/11 terrorist attack was itself a conspiracy, not of Al-Qaeda hijackers, but a grand collaboration of intelligence agencies in a hybrid coup d'etat. The purpose of this false flag operation would involve collective mass trauma-based mind control and mainstream media propaganda to justify restrictions on Americans' freedom from domestic surveillance to endless wars. One of the main pieces of evidence that points to the probability of a government conspiracy is the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, which was never struck by a plane, yet fell at free fall speeds, just like the Twin Towers. It was reported to have collapsed on BBC before it actually fell. The mass trauma of 9/11 has been the basis for setting into motion the greatest attack on our constitutional rights in history until 2020. Is there a connection between the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the assassination of President Kennedy? Why, after almost 60 years, have the JFK files remained classified? Could these files be the keystone to exposing the top-down corruption within the intelligence services?
The balance of power is still on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone in the arch of freedom, and I think we'll continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty.
There is a direct connection between the assassination of John F. Kennedy and 9/11. FBI paid informants, then as well as now, have been inciting violence and subversion. In fact, a few years ago, a Muslim community had to take out a restraining order against the FBI, which was trying to pay members of their community to commit illegal acts. The JFK files are still secret because they are controlled by the people who murdered JFK.
It's been 6 decades, and we still haven't had those things declassified completely. There were many other political assassinations where you had Malcolm X assassinated shortly after. Robert Kennedy was assassinated shortly after that. Martin Luther King. So we need people to come forward and to agitate for the release of all documents surrounding the JFK assassination. The JFK presidency, in many ways, was a presidency that was interrupted.
He didn't fit the mold that the establishment wanted in a presidency. And when he got in there and started talking about, reforming the tax codes in this country, he was very suspicious of the military-industrial complex. Those sort of elements within the power structure in the country get very uncomfortable with people like John Kennedy.
And so it's really gratifying to see the fact that in a lot of ways, JFK's presidency is now being taken up for the first time by someone who is going to continue his presidency, but is doing everything he tried to do.
There are some parallels between the Kennedy assassination and the ongoing coup against President Trump. There has been a coordinated effort by the left and the media to destroy his presidency and take him out of the Oval Office. We've seen it with the Russia hoax. We've seen it with the Ukraine impeachment hoax.
All of these things are public, and yet there's still been no accountability to the CIA for all the deeds that they have done, even parts of the FBI as well. No one has come forward to say, okay, this is where they pay the piper.
We are at the end of a counter-revolutionary movement that began with the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the commitment of John F. Kennedy Jr. to ultimately bringing his father's murderers to justice. And I think that began a process of deep, covert preparation for the day when Donald Trump could surprise everybody and come out of nowhere and be the accidental president.
It actually goes back to right after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. It was the military of the United States, but they were also militaries from other allied nations as well, who got together and they finally went to Trump and they told him, look, We've got this alliance of nations. We're all going to be putting our own nations first, but we're going to be working together as well. We need someone like you to come and be the leader of the White Hat Alliance of Nations. And in the process, he needed to become president of the United States as well. And that's why he agreed to it.
Donald Trump is the face of a larger movement for good, of white hats who said, finally, enough is enough. All of this stuff is like a massive information operation to wake up the public and make them realize that they are living in a matrix of lies.
They want us to remain divided. I just wish Americans would start thinking for themselves. Could you imagine if everyone got together and got behind our president, how strong this country would be, how morale in this country, how happy everyone would be if it wasn't so divided?
Are we at yet another crossroads between the demise and undoing of our republic, or its revitalization and rebirth? Are we experiencing a great awakening, an accelerated state of evolution in mass consciousness? Is a coup against this great awakening being played out through methods of media manipulation, false flag events, funding of violent insurgents, and the targeting of revolutionary leaders?
My name is Kathy O'Brien, and I'm a survivor of MK Ultra mind control. Mind control is an important factor that we've got to start weaving into an equation to understand what's going on in our society today. It's permeated all aspects of government, our justice system, and the entertainment industries. It's used on humanity as a whole, and it's an important thing to be able to understand. Knowledge is our defense against mind control, so this information has been censored for reasons of national security for decades while it has proliferated. I was targeted because I was born into a multi-generational incest-based family. And the Hitler-Himmler research had proven that that would make me a prime candidate or a chosen one for the MK Ultra program. The CIA was heavily involved, and when the 1947 National Security Act went into place, they were able to hide the information even further. When you have multi-generational trauma, after 3 generations, it starts to become autogenic. And one strong factor for that example would be pedophilia. When a child is abused prior to age 5 while their brain is still forming, the brain automatically compartmentalizes that event so the rest of the mind can function normally. Understanding mind control is going to be key to being able to reclaim our country, our society, our justice system, and ultimately our strength of spirit to be able to stand up and make the positive necessary differences in this world. I was born in Muskegon, Michigan. My father, who was sexually abusing me, was also manufacturing child pornography of me and sending it through the U.S. mails. And it was confiscated by a criminal faction of our government. And my father was granted immunity from prosecution if he would agree to sell me into the project. Well, my father he was part of a Blue Masonic Lodge, and the Blue Masonic Lodge has a lot of politicians in it. And our local politician at that time was Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, of course, went on to become the unelected president of the United States. And he had key players in his cabinet, like George Bush as his CIA director, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Jack Valenti. He handled his press. And Jack Valenti, of course, was head of the Motion Picture Association of America. So we're starting to see how this is permeating throughout society, enough so that our justice system was disrupted to allow for my father to continue abusing children, which he did throughout his life. He was never stopped for so-called reasons of national security. Once my father agreed to sell me into the project, he was flown to Boston, where Cardinal Law was the one who actually trained him in raising me in MK-Ultra mind control. Cardinal Law is the same one who was identified in the Catholic child abuse scandal. Pierre Trudeau was actively involved in MK-Ultra mind control, especially on the Jesuit end. And I was prostituted to him at the age of 9 at the Mackinac Island governor's mansion. The FBI, who is very much complicit in cover-up, so much so that Senator Byrd in the mid-'80s had an office in the FBI building.
Robert C. Byrd asked me to speak, but he knew the privilege was mine, not the people to whom I was speaking. He was devoted to all of you like few senators in the 37 years I was there, 36 plus years I was there, that I have ever known.
Senator Byrd was KKK. He was the most racist person you could ever imagine. He was Hillary Clinton's mentor. And by the time I was 13, he became my owner in MK-Ultra mind control. It was even in the school systems, because at that time, our governor was George Romney, which is Mitt Romney's father, the governor of Michigan was. But Governor Romney was very instrumental in bringing mind control into the school system.
The Republican Party must promote the program and provide the leadership that will capture the interest, respect, and support of a majority of Americans. I think the future of this nation depends on that.
My handler in MK-Ultra mind control was ventriloquist, stage hypnotist Alex Houston.
How you doing? Yeah, well, I was
Alex Houston was just a low mentality criminal CIA operative. He was running an operation in China where he was distributing drugs, and he needed someone who was legitimate in the industry that actually knew business, and that was how Mark Phillips met Alex Houston, was totally disgusted by everything that Alex Houston represented and what he was doing. When Mark first rescued my daughter Kelly and I in 1988, we were literally dodging bullets, going to the safety of Alaska, where I'd start remembering all the things that I'd been programmed to forget.
Hey guys, how are you? Hey, everybody.
I've been quiet since Mark's passing, but I feel this is a very important, pivotal time in history. This is what Mark would have done had he been here. Mark was a hero to us all. He was a hero to this country. He worked intelligence and wore many hats, and he was a spook who worked international operations that showed him just how far-reaching the CIA's MK-Ultra project had gone, how it was being run through the State Department, and knew that there were many government leaders on a global scale that were actively involved in implementing the New World Order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
When Mark saw that, with his integrity. He couldn't stand it. The Bohemian Grove was a place where New World Order global elite met to discuss their plans. I was on my way to be killed there, and Mark was in the right place at the right time and intercepted me en route to being killed and rescued my daughter and I straight out from under their noses. My daughter, she had named Bush, Byrd, and Clinton's in her abuse. As soon as that was discovered, National Security came in on the case. Dick Thornburg sent in the FBI, and it was Agent Brad Garrett. Brad Garrett is Clinton cover-up extraordinaire. He went on to be the ABC consultant. He covered up like the Chandra Levy case. You know, anybody can research for themselves and see the horrible things that he was involved in, the Vince Foster murder that happened right on the White House lawn during the Clinton years, you know, and all that. But anyway, Brad Garrett was brought in on our case, and he went in and testified against my child who had been trafficked. And he went into the court and he said that mind control does not exist. The human trafficking does not exist. The assistant district attorney became so disgusted with the violations of laws in the case that he began citing them to the judge. And the judge said in open court, laws do not apply in this case for reasons of national security. When I began remembering and using the methods that Mark taught me that he had gleaned from the highest levels of Intel Mind Sciences, I wrote out my memory. Once I had written it out, we turned it over to U.S. Customs. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, U.S. Customs was actively involved in attempting to stop the so-called CIA's war on drugs, which was no more than the CIA eliminating their competition worldwide.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
The Customs Commissioner, William Von Raab, became aware of what was happening with the CIA, the border agents, what was going on, how the drugs were being brought into the country, the human trafficking that was going on.
So the issue is, how do you stop that? Why is it happening? How do you stop it?
And every time he made an arrest or did anything to turn the information over, he was stopped for reasons of national security. And they wanted to know how they could possibly deal with the criminal activity they saw coming across the border. They were acutely aware of Bill Clinton's cocaine operations that he was running, and George Bush's heroin operations that were already in full swing. And we spoke out on a global scale. We spoke with concerned members of the United Nations and the World Bank, law enforcement. We both had a shared passion for raising awareness and getting truth out there. So Mark and I took the methods that he taught me and we put it into a book form. These are the methods that Mark gleaned from the highest levels of mind sciences. Mark's life was interrupted and he passed away in 2017. And I apply those same methods just to cope through the trauma of losing my best friend, from losing my husband, my soulmate, from losing my hero who saved my life and my daughter's life, who restored my mind. The methods that Mark taught me for healing, he knew the sanctity of free thought was going to need to be reinstated on so many levels. He knew the world was going to go into these powerfully transitional times that we're living right now, when awareness had reached critical mass to such a point that we the people unrigged elections and made our voices heard 2016 and elected a president who would actually represent we the people, who would uphold our Constitution, and who would take down these perpetrators, this referred to as deep state. It's just, they create an illusion of different parties when in fact they all shared the same global agenda. George Bush said that when people became disillusioned with Republicans leading them into the New World Order, that Bill Clinton as a Democrat would be put into the office of president. We need to realize that Democrats and Republicans were behind this New World Order agenda all along. And they knew that if they kept people thinking, oh, it was them, and change over to the other party, that it would create an illusion of change. People were catching on, and it was happening on such a mass rate that they were having to alter their plan. And as they kept altering their plan, it was like, oh my gosh, the New World Order's unraveling, it's not gonna work. They're done. And then Obama went in. So I think they went at it from a whole nother direction during those years with the full intent of solidifying it, wrapping it up as planned with Hillary in 2016. Hillary Clinton has been a pimp and a slave runner, a horrible abuser. She abused me. Her and Bill Clinton ran drug operations, human trafficking operations on a global scale. Not only do we need to realize the complicity of the CIA, the FBI, the Justice Department, all the way on through, the stacking even of our Supreme Court. We have a lot to clean up in this country, and mind control is key. Mark Phillips saw the deterioration going on the highest levels of intelligence. We were so happy to see that the voice of the people was finally heard, that awareness had reached critical mass, and that we were going to be going through the transition of restoring our constitutional values and justice and freedom back to our system.
I'm John D'Souza. I was an FBI special agent for 25 years, and I am now trying to let people know the truth of what's really going on around them. You know, when people go against their political leadership in the FBI or whatever organization that they're in, the intimidation, the coercion, the persecution that comes back at us, it takes a devastating emotional toll. It can lead to terrible depression and even suicide. And that's karma. That's karma that is built up for those corrupt political people who do these things. And that karma does come back to them. In 2008, something unbelievable happened for us in the FBI. We were getting lots of rumors about this high-level asset that worked for several intelligence agencies at the same time. He worked for the Saudi intelligence service, he worked for the CIA, and he was being developed as a political asset in Chicago, Illinois. He was not even a United States citizen, but it was said that he was a student visa and that he was a national from another country. In 2008, everyone in the intelligence structure found out who he was. It was this individual whose name I don't like to say, who became president in 2008 of the United States.
And I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
One of his code names was Renegade. His real name was Barry Sortoro, but he adopted a different name for his political career. When they ran him for president, the CABAL, basically, this was the culmination of so many of their plans for so many years. His mission was to destroy the United States from within, one institution at a time. One of the things he did, of course, was he defunded our military. He brought down the resources that they got. But then he ordered our military in many, many instances and in various theaters to attack our allies and to defend and supply and help our enemies. That's exactly how he created ISIS. He would say publicly that the military were going to bomb our enemies, but then he would have the military actually bomb enemies of ISIS, our allies. He gave ISIS funding and equipment by basically ordering our military to take equipment into a certain theater and then abandon it. And the commanders would say, that's ridiculous. We'd just be handing that stuff over to ISIS. And the president's office would say, don't question orders, just follow your orders. And that was very common. That happened so many times that it demoralized our military. And basically, it took their heart away. It was an awful, awful thing. Whenever the cabal has a successful project, it creates permutations into many other areas and creates more corruption. Like the JFK assassination, it spiraled out into many other assassinations that were also incredibly successful. Well, in the case of Renegade, the fact that they were able to get him into office and they were able to get him going with great momentum, destroying American institutions, that spiraled into this huge tornado of corruption. And that whirlwind just got bigger and bigger and affected the lives of so many FBI agents with integrity, people at DOJ with integrity, that just went through everything in the American government, up to and including when Renegade appointed James Comey to be director of the FBI. He was a pretty well-known bagman for the Clinton Foundation. He had been in many places where investigations against the Clinton cartel had been reduced or had been disappeared completely. And he was brought in to be the director of the FBI for the same purpose. We called him the Cardinal, and he was named after the Cardinal Richelieu from the time of Louis XIV, who was a well-known cabal agent who pretended to be a religious authority, but all he wanted was to amass power. Comey was a person who had this theater of being a very holy person, a Boy Scout whose integrity was above reproach. And meanwhile, he was quietly a cabal agent in bed with the Clinton Foundation at all times. You know, as I saw things getting worse and worse with Renegade and things that Renegade was doing, I decided it was time for me to retire from the FBI. I had had 25 years service, and I spoke to several of the bosses in there, and I advised them who the Cardinal was and what he'd been up to. I had hoped that there was some way they could avoid his appointment. They told me there was no way, and I found out that word had gotten back to him about my misgivings about who he was and what he was doing. What happened then was that Comey dispatched what I call an angel of death. These are government executives whose job is to get rid of people who the administration found inconvenient, and to come up with these BIP operations. The B is blacken reputation, I for isolate the person, and P for purge the person out of the organization, out of the government, in whatever way you can. And it's very common, but the first time I saw it done up close was when it was done to me. He gathered everybody at the FBI office where I worked. He told them that John D'Souza is under investigation for several serious crimes, felonies. In truth, he actually was making this all up. because the director had demanded that he find a way to fire me. He had many, many FBI agents searching through all my records of all my cases and all my files so that they could somehow take that and maybe blow it up into a criminal violation. And why was that? Because that order had come from the cardinal and he wanted it done. They thought they had found maybe a couple of alleged process violations, and they took those over to the U.S. attorney. U.S. attorney laughed them out of the office. But yet, they still pressed forward. And then I just got together with my wife to find out what was our plan. What were we gonna do?
I'm a fighter. Don't just cross my arms and cry. I don't. I told him, we're gonna fight this and you can do it. And we're gonna show the kind of agent that you've been. So that's what we did, and we just praying and hold on to the hand of God and trusted it, and that everything was going to be okay.
There really were no precedents for pursuing these kinds of procedural infractions against an FBI agent from his own organization. Nothing like that had ever been done. But again, because it was the director of the FBI that was involved here, I knew that I was in danger still of maybe being detained for a fishing expedition and try to get me to admit to something, anything at all. And my wife finally said, let's contact mi amigo.
It's a very respected spiritual person that we have as a friend. And it was very, very hard for us because we have not even shared this with our family. We have not say anything to our family because we didn't want my parents, his parents, or his family to be worried about it.
Our friend was a man out of South America. He was a healer, he was a holy man, and he told me, I'll take care of this for you. I can do it. You don't have to tell me anything. And then he went into an altered state and he told me things he could not possibly know. And he recited every detail of everything that happened up to and including that moment. And he said to me, you are going to go in to the FBI office for your final confrontation. You will give them what is due to them. Your enemies will not be able to see you. And you will not say a word that can be used against you. And he says, and you will end up coming out of that office with all honors and with your head held high. And then he terminated the blessing, and I was covered in sweat. And I felt complete and total peace as we prepared and went in to the FBI office for the final confrontation. I wanted to be there early to make sure of whether there were any surprises waiting for me. My wife, as soon as we arrived there, it was still nighttime. She looked up at the crescent moon.
And I thought it was another sign of that everything was going to be okay, and a sign from God. And it was him just smiling to us and telling us that he's there for us. And it gave him also the courage to go in there and confront everything that he had to go through.
And as I walked into that building, I actually saw several of the supervisors and executives who had been involved in the effort to try to 86 me, to nail me, and none of them could see me. It was like Daniel in the lion's den, just like the holy man said. And we cheerfully went through the exit interview. My wife saw me with a great big smile on my face in the sunshine, because the sun had come out now. And she told me it was one of the happiest moments of her life when she saw me walking out of there, happy to be done with my ordeal at the FBI.
The good people are always going to be protected. Karma can go back to them, and that's what happened to the people that were trying to hurt my husband. The bosses, up to the top bosses, they all got their karma. So the same thing that they tried to do to us, it went back to them. God wants us to be happy, to enjoy this life, and how we can do that is sharing the light.
Yeah, my name's Joe Flynn. I'm the youngest sibling of General Michael Flynn's 9 siblings, and happy to be here with you guys today. Michael always was a tenacious, little dude. He's a fighter. My mother, there's no secret, my mother knew this when he was born and named him Michael after the Archangel, St. Michael. He went on to the military, he had that kind of reputation, kind of being a maverick and, not staying in his lane kind of person. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not so good. General Flynn was very vociferous about the need to reform the intelligence community, and that the intelligence community had become corrupt and infiltrated by political appointees who were really trying to infiltrate and change the way intelligence was gathered and use our own intelligence services to spy on American people, which, of course, General Flynn experienced and the Trump campaign experienced. So they knew that he was going to reform those intelligence agencies. They knew he was going to do an audit of the amount of money that was spent. We have 17 intelligence agencies. How do we need 17 different intelligence agencies? What were they all doing? Were they coordinating? Who was running them? All these issues needed to be exposed. And the intelligence community has really burrowed itself deeply into the power structure of the nation. General Flynn was very uncomfortable with it, and he came from that community. And I think they knew this. And so the first thing they have to do is get rid of this guy who's going to come in here and expose all of this. What's another area that I think has been infiltrated deeply by a political element is the Department of Justice. And I think the Attorney General is slowly, changing that. I mean, God willing, we have another term at least to continue to clean out the Department of Justice and take partisan actors out of there. This is a real serious problem for this country. There needs to be sunlight, particularly on the amount of money that's spent on intelligence and how it's spent. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't have intelligence. It doesn't mean we don't have thousands, tens of thousands of very patriotic people who are working our intelligence agencies that need to stay there because we need to protect this country from our enemies, foreign and domestic, no doubt about that. But there has been no real oversight of this. The research that people do to get this information out is critical to the health and longevity of this republic.
This was irregular warfare at its finest in politics. But we have what we call citizen journalists. The journalists that we have in our media did a disservice to themselves, actually more than they did to this country. They did a disservice to themselves because they displayed an arrogance that is unprecedented. And so the American people decided to take over the idea of information. They took over the idea of information, and they did it through social media. And we have an army of digital soldiers.
There's no coincidence the fact that when Trump won the presidency, Obama, in his first meeting with him in the Oval Office, warned him about 2 people, Kim Jong-un and Michael Flynn. Pretty amazing when you think about it. He's warning the president against a 3-star general who he appointed as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mike's named National Security Advisor and begins his job during the transition speaking to his counterparts all over the world. Russians, Chinese, Indonesia, it doesn't matter what country. He's having 25, 30 telephone calls a day with various leaders. General Flynn had been, done a speech in Moscow earlier that year, which he debriefed the DIA before and after, which nobody ever talks about. So he was almost on a mission on doing that speech. All of a sudden, the narrative starts coming out in the press about, the Russians have infiltrated the Trump campaign, and who's behind that? Well, clearly that information was leaked, and now we know was leaked from the White House itself. I can only speculate that would have to have come from Susan Rice's office. But that kind of sets this whole Russia hoax in motion. Andy McCabe calls Michael Flynn, says, I've got a couple of agents that want to come over and talk to you about some routine security things. His entire career, he's in the intelligence community. So he's thinking these guys are allies. They come in, they start asking him questions about, his conversations with the Russian ambassador, and he's trying to recall, well, you guys already have the transcript, so why are you asking me? You know what I said. In their 302, they did not discern that he was knowingly not telling the truth. And by the way, they said, well, he's a incoming national security advisor. How can he not remember a conversation with the Russian ambassador? Because he talked to 500 other ambassadors over the course of the last month. His own lawyers at that time didn't tell him that the agents couldn't discern whether he was being truthful or not. If he had had that piece of information, and then subsequently all the other exculpatory information that came out, there would have been no plea deal that day. At the end of the day, General Flynn resigned himself because he didn't want to be a distraction to the president. And of course, Comey then writes his famous memo talking about how, this was the president obstructing justice because there was an ongoing investigation against General Flynn. President Trump fires Comey. Then then shortly thereafter, Rod Rosenstein brings Mueller in, thinking maybe Mueller would become FBI director. When President Trump doesn't name him FBI director, what happens? Rod Rosenstein calls a special counsel, Jeff Sessions, mistakenly recuses himself from this. And then he took everything out of the hands of the president and everything out of the hands of the attorney general. And this thing took on a life of its own. So now you have a special counsel created. Who's on that special counsel? These were donors to the Clinton campaign. These people had an agenda.
Here's my concern. My concern is that Hillary Clinton has demonstrated a carelessness, in fact, according to the FBI director, extreme carelessness with classified information. So I have a lot of reservations with her receiving any of these classified briefings at all.
The pressure cooker starts getting tighter and tighter on General Flynn. They're going after all of his stuff. They're going after his business. They're going after any, contacts, people he knew, whatever. They're throwing everything they can to see if they get something. And Rod Rosenstein around that time authorizes the special counsel to go after Michael Flynn Jr. Well, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Because now they've brought his son into this. And now his grandson. Probably the worst day in our family's history was December the 1st, 2017, when General Flynn pled guilty to one count of misleading the FBI. Immediately, 3 days later, the same judge that accepted his guilty plea was recused from the case. So, of course, the media goes nuts. General Flynn pleads guilty. They're thinking within 3 days, everybody in the White House is going to be picked up in a paddy wagon and brought to the local jail here in Washington. Okay? What happens? Nothing. Why were there no arrests, indictments, or charges for anyone around President Trump after General Flynn pled guilty? Because there was nothing to give. There was no collusion. There was no back channel deals and all this other nonsense that they were talking about. The sentencing memo that the government put forth was that he was an honorable man, served his country, and did the right thing by giving us the information we needed, and we recommend no jail time. Well, we all know what happened on December 18th, 2018, in front of Judge Emmett Sullivan. He starts asking the government prosecutors, should General Flynn be brought up on treason charges? Out of the blue. Starts talking about this, and we're all sitting there looking at each other, going, where's he going with this? This is supposed to be over in an hour. The government's saying, this guy's a great guy, he did the right thing, we're moving on. Comes back and he says, I want you to take the break so that you can think about what direction we're gonna go in, because if I sentence you today, I'm gonna sentence you harshly. So he basically threatened to put him in prison that day. Lori says, they're gonna put my husband in prison today. This is not going the way you, our lawyers at the time, told us was gonna go. This was your job to get us through this. This guy's gonna put us in prison. If he wants to give us more time, we're gonna take more time today. So we go back into the courtroom, we'll take the time. Whew, we come out of there. And we're stunned. The family was really kind of traumatized by that experience. Previously, I had met Sidney Powell, who was a fundraiser for General Flynn. Sidney happens to live in Dallas, and she was there signing books. And she goes, great to meet you. We took a couple pictures. She said, hey, do you have any time while you're here? And I said, yeah, I got to catch a flight in the morning, but the hotel's near the airport. let's get together. So we get together for coffee the next morning, and I thought, an hour, I was gonna know about the famous Sidney Powell. We ended up spending 3 hours together. And she really opened my eyes to how bad the defense of General Flynn had been up to that point. She said to me, side to side, there's only one way out of this, and that's to fight this. We've got to move to get as much exculpatory information as we possibly can, because this is a setup. And then I get a call from Mike. We're going to hire Sidney Powell, and we're going to fight this.
Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn appeared in court Monday with a new lawyer. Attorney Sidney Powell now represents him. Powell is considered a fierce critic of special counsel Robert Mueller. She previously claimed Flynn was spied on by the FBI as part of the probe and had said Flynn should withdraw his guilty plea.
Sidney Powell takes over the case, and she starts filing motions. I need 7 pages of Brady information. She lists them all out. Judge Sullivan issues a response to it saying, basically, not only are you not entitled to any of this Brady information, it's irrelevant to the case. And by the way, you're a plagiarist. Okay, so we knew at that point this guy wasn't going to play ball no matter what. So what does Sidney do? Sidney files some more motions, but Mike then files an affidavit, and Lori both file affidavits. The affidavit explains, it's General Flynn's voice, exactly what happened to him during this whole time. People want to know, well, what actually happened? He says it, it's public record. And when that happens, the Department of Justice Attorney General says, this woman is not going to give this up. She is not going to stop here. She's asking to pull the plea, means she's willing to take this thing to trial. She takes this thing to trial. She's going to be up our rear ends for another 2 years trying to get exculpatory information. So Attorney General Barr does the right thing, brings in a career FBI agent and now an attorney to come in and review this case. And sure enough, a treasure trove of exculpatory information shows up. Notes between FBI agents and the head of counterintelligence started. What is the purpose of the Flynn interview on the Flynn interview that took place? Why do we want to do this? Do we want to get him to lie? Do we want to get him fired? And by the way, what was the predicate for talking to him anyway? He's the incoming national security advisor. This is a routine job that he's doing, talking to ambassadors and so forth. The Department of Justice drops all the charges with prejudice, which means this is such a bad situation that we want to make sure that this never comes up again. And I think a lot of the reasons why they dropped it was the embarrassment that they felt, not only about what the FBI did to conceal this information, but what their own prosecutors did to drum up these charges and to go after General Flynn with really no predicate whatsoever. A week goes by, nothing, no crickets from Sullivan. Sidney loses her patience, as she should have, and says, well, I'm gonna use the weapons that I have in my quiver to get this judge to sign this dismissal and move on from this case. So she files a writ of mandamus, which is an extraordinary thing to do. It's something that doesn't often happen. It's basically going to a higher court and saying, you need to force the judge to do what he's supposed to do here, what the law says that he should do. The Circuit Appeals Court here rules in favor of that mandamus 2-1. What does Sullivan do? Sullivan appeals to the en banc, meaning the entire appeals court, and says, well, I want an en banc review. He does it, and the appeals court here in Washington, D.C. basically kicks it back to Sullivan. Not only is Sullivan having his hearing, but he brings in an amicus, a former judge from the Southern District of New York, who is hyper-partisan, who had written numerous op-eds in the Washington Post about this case. And he's now the amicus, meaning the friend of the court. 3 of the 4 hours, at least, was Gleason pontificating on stuff that most of it was untrue. Didn't even bring up all the exculpatory information. Said on record, well, FBI agents lie all the time. We had the Department of Justice, who was our prosecutor, acting as part of the defense team. We had the judge with an amicus acting as prosecutors. As Sidney said, she said, made a reference to Through the Looking Glass, Alice in Wonderland, Through the Looking Glass. Up is down, down is up. It was an unprecedented situation in American history. Rule 48A means when the government dismisses the charges the judge must sign the document. There's never been a Rule 48A motion in this country's history that has been overturned. Judge Sullivan yesterday was looking for crimes to pin on General Flynn. Gleason, looking for crimes to pin on General Flynn. Department of Justice, defending the defendant. Prosecutor defending the defendant. We're faced with really an unprecedented historical situation here that I think most Americans don't really understand the ramifications of this. We can't give up. We're fighting really for the average citizen right now. We're fighting for the constitutional rights of the average citizens. We're fighting for justice. And you know, it's not easy to do that in the District of Columbia. You know, again, it's humbling to be part of it, but exposing it is a duty, and that's the way we view it. So here we are.
My name is Robin Gritz. I am a former FBI agent, 16 years, specialized in counterterrorism. My career was dedicated and decorated. Now I am a person that works with the state of Texas that fights human trafficking. There are a lot of people out there hoping one day that they'll see my face or one of my colleagues' face and saying, we got you, we're getting you out of this situation.
This must end, this has to end. But sadly, modern slavery is more prevalent than ever. With that said, we have the tools to stop it, and this administration is committed to doing just that, to end this tremendous scourge and to win the fight against modern-day slavery.
We have a chance here to make a difference. We have a president that's willing to help us make a difference. And it has become such an epidemic. For me, it's fulfilling to be able to say we rescued someone. We rescued a few people, and I just felt so good going to bed that night. Put my head on the pillow and saying there are people tonight that are safe, that are not getting beaten, that are not getting raped, that are not being treated as just a possession. They have hope tonight, and I want to make a difference, so I'm glad to help them get out of that situation and make a difference as well.
See a SWAT vehicle out there, also a big van with the doors open, and then maybe 50 to 60 people lined up there as Phoenix PD, SWAT, and Border Patrol conduct this investigation. He said this was an ongoing human smuggling investigation.
I started speaking out because I want people that are going through this, whether they were in the FBI, CIA, I've heard from Secret Service, DEA, and local police departments, they should know they're not alone. My case started back in 2012. That's when, for me, things went south in the FBI, specifically with Andrew McCabe, who we all know now is the disgraced deputy director fired from the FBI. I worked with Andy from 2005 until 2013 when I resigned. I also worked with General Flynn. General Flynn was the first person to publicly stand up for me when I was being torn apart by the FBI. And then I see Andy McCabe, who was central to my case, going after General Flynn. And some people may minimize that, but I don't, because I know he's vindictive. And I know he still dislikes me strongly. So it's personal for me with General Flynn. I left the Bureau because of what they were putting me through. I ended up losing my house. I ended up being deemed homeless by the state of Pennsylvania, being on public assistance. And for 2.5 years, I couldn't get a job over minimum wage because every time I went for a really good job interview, somehow I would almost have the job, and then the next thing you know, we're not going to offer it to you. I have friends all over the world now that have gone through this because of what the FBI does when you stand up for the truth, when you decide to tell the truth or even go to your congressman, and they destroy your life.
But what happened to General Flynn should never happen again in our country.
He was persecuted, and many other people were persecuted. He was treated horribly. He was treated very, very horribly by a group of very bad people. And I think you'll see things are going to start to come out.
I just see the FBI as being the trusted authority. They are trusted by the American people to keep the American people safe. We were the protectors. We're the people that are going out there and finding out the truth. Whether it be major corporations that are just bankrupting individuals, the American people, whether it's a murderer that has fled and is a fugitive, we would go after that. We go after the big crimes to look after and arrest bad cops. We had a couple cases of taking out a good portion of police departments, and I personally arrested a police chief. He was arrested, the mayor was arrested, the prior mayor was arrested, and the prior chief of police was arrested. So I saw us looking into corruption, and not just small time corruption, but big cases. I loved my job in the FBI. I loved protecting the American people against terrorists, foreign and domestic. Now I'm seeing we have some other domestic issues that I never in my wildest dreams believed I'd be witnessing during my lifetime.
The unsealed records are from a 2015 lawsuit filed by Virginia Roberts Giuffre against Maxwell. They claim Maxwell abused many young girls on Epstein's private island. The documents also mention Bill Clinton. Giuffre says she saw the former president on Epstein's island with Maxwell and, quote, 2 young girls.
When I first heard about Epstein, I said, how could this evil person and be walking around? How can this be going on? And then hearing the depths of the people he had as clients, I think we're going to see a lot of powerful people be brought out in the public.
I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan.
When I see a human trafficking raid that nets some clergy members or nets politicians, nets a police officer, there's a lot of reasons to hide things. I don't think that mainstream media wants to hit the real subjects because they may have some involvement in it. Well, I would question on who owns them, who runs them. I would also question on the agenda, and there may be people also in these media outlets that were involved in an incident that they're blackmailed. It is a huge statement that they're not covering human trafficking like they should have. Human trafficking has many more victims than COVID. And human trafficking is not something that can be cured by wearing a mask or having a vaccine or not, or staying 6 feet apart from each other. Not a lot of people will talk about it. It's not a popular subject. Guess it's not happy enough for them or something. I don't think that's it. I think people are involved. Discussing stuff with General Flynn and other friends, it all goes back to fighting good and evil. And I think we are right now at a time in our lives, a time in our history where it's not just here in the United States, it is international, and it is good and evil. It is a spiritual warfare, and we have to fight for our lives. It's a scary time because I wish more people were woken up to it. I was detailed to the CIA for Counterterrorism Division. And that is where the trouble started for me in the FBI. When you go on a direct duty detail to the CIA, you become the possession of the CIA. You are at their tasking, their time, anything they tell you to do. That's what you are there for 2 years. Unfortunately, the FBI still does not follow those rules. And so they started trying to hold me accountable for FBI work. And I said, this is not, I can't go to those meetings. I can't do that stuff. I'm working what I'm supposed to by policy. And 2 individuals I worked with seemed to have an issue with me being a female, a very strong female. I was the only one in the unit that was a female. And behind my back was trashing what I was doing at the CIA. And they started making comments about when I would go to meetings, oh, you just want to meet Navy SEALs, or just different things about being basically a female. And I told them, I said, I didn't feel like I was being treated right. I didn't feel I was being treated equally. So I went and met with the Equal Employment Opportunity person at the FBI and ended up filing a complaint. Within 5 days of filing that complaint, I was pulled from my position at the CIA by the FBI, and that was at the direction of Andy McCabe. And they filed an internal investigation, or OPR, against me for time and attendance and insubordination, and disruptive behavior while on duty. All things that are like minimal, because when you have nothing against someone, you just throw time and attendance at them, and any federal employee will tell you that. Director Mueller was the director at the time. And I think he could have put a stop to this, but he didn't. And I think a lot of it is because leading the charge and making up false information about me, also putting it on official documents, was Andy McCabe. I started quickly realizing that they were not after the truth. They were after pushing me out. For a year and a half, they made my life a living hell. They made it hell to go into work. They did a smear campaign, just like you see them doing with President Trump and with Flynn. They infiltrated my entire life, did surveillance on me. They tried to make me out to be just this awful person that didn't know what she was doing after 15, 16 years of top-of-the-line ratings and awards and commendations from even directors of agencies. Never thought I was going to have to file a discrimination lawsuit against any agency. I have since seen such egregious acts of discrimination against women and minorities. I get calls all the time from people still currently in the Bureau going through it. So I try and help them as much as I can. We have a little group, and the Bureau should know we're all watching. We all see what you're doing, and we all see who you're doing it to, and we make sure that people are held accountable. I have seen a lot of the truth of stuff that didn't seem quite right before. Now I've been in my lawsuit for 8 years. It does have finally some movement. You can win these cases. You can do class action lawsuits. We are looking at that. You can seek justice by telling your story. It's therapy to get your story out too. But to people that are going through this, it's not the end of the world. There's a life out there. What do you really want to do? I'm doing a job right now that I really enjoy. And I would have never done this had I stayed there. You, by coming out and telling your story, can help a lot of people. And we're all out there. I mean, you see us on Twitter, you see us on Facebook. Reach out. We're all out there for you.
Well, I'm Robert David Steele, born in the USA, a lifetime of rich experiences, including Marine Corps infantry officer, CIA spy, founder of a national intelligence facility, top nonfiction reviewer, father, husband, 3 children who are looking at a dark world if we don't get this right. And at the end of the day, I'm just a human being who tries to do right every day. I've had an extraordinary life. I've given up tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions, to be ethical. I grew up overseas in the Dutch West Indies, Colombia, Vietnam, 4 years as a child. I lived in Thailand when my father was captured by the Chinese while sailing a boat from Hong Kong, from Saigon to Hong Kong. I finished high school in Singapore, the Singapore American School. I came back from Singapore to Muhlenberg College. I did a degree in political science. My first thesis was on multinational corporations and home host country issues. And that's when I first discovered that governments were servants to the banks and that corporations were the enemy. I was rewarded for my distinguished work at Muhlenberg with a fellowship at Lehigh University. And there I did a graduate degree on predicting revolution. I created the only original model that exists today of how to predict and address revolutionary preconditions in the political, legal, socioeconomic, ideocultural, techno-demographic, and natural geographic domains. And we still do not do holistic analytics and true cost economics, which would prevent revolution in the United States, the United Kingdom, where we are in a revolutionary state. The two biggest conditions of revolution are concentration of wealth and loss of faith in the legitimacy of the government. Donald Trump is at the intersection of those two issues, and I believe he is preventing a violent revolution with all that he is doing. I became a Marine Corps infantry officer, and on my first tour was immediately promoted to be the S1 adjutant for a battalion landing team of 1,500 people. But I was bored in the Marine Corps in peacetime. So I had seen a small ad in Stars and Stripes for the CIA. I applied. I was one of 65 people out of 25,000 applicants that was accepted to be a clandestine case officer. And I was very fortunate because I did not experience the toxic environment of CIA headquarters. I was moved immediately to an overseas tour after training, and I did 3 back-to-back overseas tours, including one as one of the first 2 case officers in the 1980s assigned to chase terrorists full-time. That's when I learned that the National Security Agency does not provide signals intelligence support to clandestine operations. I've since learned that the NSA does not provide tactical signals intelligence support to the FBI either. What they do instead is they give the FBI and contractors access to their database. They're using the NSA database to settle grudges. All right, the system is completely broken. When I came back to Washington after 3 back-to-back tours, I now realize that the Soviet KGB and the Cuban DGI had all of our assets and all of our case officers identified across all of Latin America. I signed up to steal the truth from my country. I did not sign up to tell lies from my country or to do assassination or torture and bring down regimes. This is bullshit. CIA is a joke. All that stuff should be stopped. I then was assigned by approval of the Director of Central Intelligence at the time, Bill Casey, and Bill Donnelly, the Deputy Director for Administration, moved me over and they created the artificial intelligence staff around me. That's when I learned that we don't have a single all-source processing capability where signals intelligence, imagery intelligence, human intelligence, open source intelligence comes together. All of this showed me that the intelligence community was completely broken. It was clear that my days at CIA were numbered. I was blessed to be asked by the United States Marine Corps to leave the CIA and become the senior civilian responsible for creating the Marine Corps intelligence activity. And that's where I discovered open sources was the solution. I could do 96% of what the president needs with open source information that is not expensive, not risky, and has the added advantage that it can be shared with Congress, with the media, and with the public, and with allies. Nobody wanted to hear this because they saw me as a threat. They saw me as someone who would lead to the reduction of the secret intelligence community budget by 70%. An open source intelligence agency would be comprised of 2 parts, an information bureau and an engineering bureau. We need to completely redirect the entire intelligence community so that 1/3 does third world and other issues that are not covered now, and 1/3 does domestic intelligence, including heuristic analytics and true cost economics, and making full use of open source intelligence. I spent 20 years helping over 60 countries and over 7,000 officers understand that to do secret intelligence properly, you have to bracket it with open source intelligence on the one hand, don't send a spy where a schoolboy can go, and with counterintelligence on the other. I believe that Congress has castrated the FBI, and we don't do counterintelligence, because if we did, we would have no traitors, we would have no elite pedophiles, and we would have no white-collar criminals in the United States of America. I got permission under SecNav Instruction 5000, and my general allowed me to run an open source intelligence conference. I was expecting maybe 100 people. 650 showed up, including 15 Swedes. This scared the crap out of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so they went to my general and they said, we need for you to tell Steele he is never again to run an open source intelligence conference. We don't want to hear about it. My general lacked ethics and would not let me serve the president and the public and the Secretary of Defense with open source intelligence. It was that experience that persuaded me that I had to leave the US government in order to save the US government. And I looked my general in the eye, I said, fuck you, sir, I resign. My personal ambition is to create an open source agency that provides the president and the cabinet and our military commanders, as well as the public, the Congress, and the press, with 100% of what they need to know to make evidence-based decisions in the public interest. Signals intelligence is extremely helpful and important because it does all cell phone calls, all text messages, all emails, all game chats, and all banking transactions, including banking transactions to offshore banks.
They're taking in fundamentally the entire fiber network inside the United States and collecting all that data and storing it in a program for they call it Stellar Wind is the name for their program. That's the domestic collection of data on U.S. citizens to other U.S. citizens, everything we're doing. Phone calls, emails, and then financial transactions, credit cards, things like that, yeah, all of it.
Now, Bill Binney has said that with 10 people in 30 days, he can identify every traitor, every elite pedophile, and every white-collar criminal. We have it all. All of the illicit wealth in the world has been tracked by the National Security Agency for the past 15 years. We now know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Wall Street has stolen $100 trillion from Main Street with naked short selling. We also know that Wall Street has laundered $100 trillion in dirty money from trafficking in children and women and drugs and guns and gold. I can never tire of saying that 90% of the people in the US government, the US military, the US intelligence community are good people trapped in a bad system. The secret intelligence community serves the deep state. It does not serve the American public. And CIA in particular has been doing torture, rendition and torture, drone assassination, regime change, helping to start wars based on lies, all because war and trafficking in humans and drugs and so forth are a profit center for Wall Street and the deep state. And once the president gets Binney into NSA and processes 100% of what we have at NSA, we have every single one of you by the balls. You cannot survive this. You have one out. The Truth and Reconciliation out is make the deal, motherfucker, or you are going to die.
Never before in history have we seen such a united effort to expose the corruption inside our governments, institutions, and intelligence agencies. We all have the opportunity in this moment to be the keys to unlock our future collectively, a future that unites everyone in the pursuit of truth and disclosure. This will take us setting aside our differences, our race, our gender, our politics, to do what has never been done before. These are the times of the whistleblower, the citizen journalist, and the digital soldier. This is our greatest stand in the fight for the truths that we hold to be self-evident.
I'm going to fight for the truth, and I'm going to get the truth out there in any way that I can. And thankfully these days, people have the opportunity to do that, do their own research. The shift we're going to see in the next, probably over the next decade, is a moving away from corporate media and an explosion of independent journalism through the advent of this whole digital soldier movement.
Because we're living now in an information age where data is more important than bullets. So we can have an entire movement of citizen soldiers, digital soldiers.
In order for people to make rational decisions in their lives, what to vote for, where to work, where to live, they need to have real, true information and not be led down a specific narrative. And I mean that for the right and the left.
There's corruption on both sides. You're going to have people in Congress, up on the Hill, in your local government, in your state government, Democrat, Republican, that are corrupt. People have got to break free and start thinking for themselves.
I mean, I think we should not be tripped up into partisan nonsense, because that doesn't really solve problems.
Everyone is controlled by traitors at the top of the intelligence community and at the top of the Republican and Democratic parties. Both parties.
There's now an army of digital soldiers out there, average citizens, citizen journalists, who have taken the idea of information into their own hands because the media did a disservice to them and to the country, and the media did a disservice to themselves.
They know that they're creating an illusion through the media. We have woke up, we're taking a stand, they cannot control us any longer.
Now everyone can produce their own information, and everyone can get their own information for themselves and not depend on some corporate media to deliver that.
It's all as if America is turning from a cocoon into a butterfly and launching.
And their old methods of trying to traumatize and control a nation aren't working anymore, and they're being exposed. We can see everything that they're doing.
So I think what we're seeing here is a coming of age, a great awakening.
We think it's going to transform, and it is transforming, the way information is delivered in this country and in the world.
Things happen for a reason, and you yourself have the power to make a difference.
We have to do our own homework. We have to be guided by the Spirit and choose.
So we're talking here about good versus evil.
We the people have won. The strength of the human spirit has won, and they cannot control us anymore.
It's a marvelous, glorious struggle. But as long as we're involved in it, we're already free.
To the people that are watching this film, understand how important and what a hard job it is to be an agent for the U.S. government. And there's a lot of incredibly talented, intelligent, patriotic, God-fearing people that work for our federal agencies, our military, our intelligence agencies, our Federal Bureau of Investigation, and others. We've got great people in our agencies and in our military. We have to be really, really sure of the leadership of those organizations, because that's where it all starts. I want to be really careful that people don't start throwing everyone in one bucket, okay? My message to anything is, again, why elections matter. I think it gives the president an opportunity to dive into those agencies, to take out those people that don't have the best interests of this country in mind, create a leadership and a culture about service to the nation and not service to a political party or service to a political agenda. The digital soldiers, the digital soldier movement needs to keep up the fight. Information is the new weapon. No matter what happens to us, keep up the fight, digital soldiers. We need you. We need more of you. And we need you to spread the news and spread the truth. And that is paramount. No matter what happens to General Flynn, no matter what happens to any of us, we're still going to be here. We might be beaten down. We might, take a few more hits here, but we're still going to be here. And we're not giving up, and we're certainly not going to back down.
Each day you have a choice. Each moment an opportunity. For each of us holds the power to change the future and record a new history. Her story, our story. Hiding this knowledge from the people was the first true conspiracy. But taking knowledge back is the basis for the greatest awakening humanity has ever seen.